Can you make synthwave if you're not allowed to use synths? No hardware synths, no software synths, no synth samples, none of that. I think we can. To start, we'll need the audio cable plugged into my audio interface. And with that, we've got all the starting point that we need. Thank you so much to this viewer for suggesting this idea after I made music with a stylophone. We're going to take that idea and take this way farther. So the first thing you're going to want to do is clean up that buzz sample. I've got it collapsed down to mono, and it sounds pretty bad. So let's go ahead and start adding stuff. First of all, I want to lock this to an actual note instead of hovering just somewhere around the pitch spectrum. So I've brought up a tuning plugin here. And I've selected more or less the closest note, set my attack time to 0, and now we are locked to an actual note. Next up, I've OTT'd it a little bit to get some high-end detail out of it. Now we start layering that same sample, but in different configurations. So for this second layer, in addition to the OTT and tuning, we've pitched up an octave, cut some lows because we don't need them, dimension expander to get a bit of width, and one more layer on top of that, which is a parallel processed version with some distortion and stereo widening. So here's without. And you'll notice I've also EQ'd it way down. These three layers together sound like this. This is going to be our basic building block that we're going to shape into every synth sound that you heard. Although note that I am allowing myself to use drum samples. The most important way we're going to shape these sounds to get them into something relatively listenable is going to be filters in the form of either just straight up EQ automation or this plugin, Tal Filter 2, which is completely free and gives you these lovely filter and volume LFOs. So here's before and here's after. We've got a nice little bass pluck going. I later ended up adding this pitch plugin, which I've automated. Doesn't sound great, but it follows the overall little song idea. Up next, we've got some saturation and soft clipping. A little bit of reverb. A little bit more parallel distortion. Some widening. We're once again using Tal Filter to sidechain it to the kick. This is what that sounds like. And a bit more EQ. So we've taken this and turned it into a semi-decent bass pluck. From here, I took all of these just raw elements, this buzz, rendered it out and brought it into the built-in sampler plugin in Reaper so I can map it to a keyboard. And our first use of the sample is going to be this little ARP thing. Now, I've got like a couple $100 of plugins on here, so like this is pretty ridiculous, but hopefully you're starting to see where this is headed. This is what it sounds like originally, just the raw buzz. And you can see I've got 2 octaves of it in here. And the higher octave is at a slightly lower velocity, so it's a little bit softer than kind of the main octave. So what I've done here is I've created some fake unison by adding multiple different pitch shifters and shifting it around by literal cents, just a tiny amount, and it gets that phasiness. And I've even panned those pitched elements around a little bit and then mixed them in with the dry signal, plus an octave up version. That makes it sound so much floatier and so much more like an actual synth. Also more kind of 80s cheesy, but in this case, that totally works. Bit of amp sim. I've mixed it in very subtly. This reversed pitched up delay, aka crystallizer by Sound Toys. A lot of reverb. That's doing a lot of work here. And just cut all of those lows that we've created. Up next, we take a pretty similar setup. And to get my filter movement in this case, I am literally doing filter automation that just comes in when the notes change. You're going to see this again in a second. And I've got the resonance on this EQ cranked, a little bit of crystallizer, once again, a bit of rift to distort it quite a bit. That's doing a lot of work, and then a bit of reverb afterwards. And ideally, that meshes with the kick and bass pretty well. Now, it sounds fairly tinny, but that's also because I wanted it to float over the top of the mix, so do with that what you will. And then we get into the chords. These are constructed very similarly. And in fact, there's not even like that crazy of an amount of processing on here. So here's what it sounds like raw. Not great, but the bones of it are there. That same pitching stuff around by Synths trick to get a bit of fake unison. Filter movement. The reason I didn't do one singular filter sweep and then render it out is because if I map that into a sampler, it's going to start changing the speeds of all of the samples as they get pitched up and down, and it's going to sound really inconsistent. Doing it this way, I get to just very precisely control my filter movement, and that even allows me to do some fun stuff like this little bass filter sweep here. Plus change how the filter reacts on the chords. Regardless, let's keep building up these chords. Crystallizer again. That's doing a lot here to bring the sound to life. And of course, spaced out, which is doing even more to make the sound a lot more listenable and a lot more 80s. Some sampled drums. And that is how you make Synthwave without using any synths or anything even remotely close. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see me do something similar with hardware, that being the MPC-1 and a stylophone, you can check this video out over here. And if you'd like to see some more Synthwave, you can click or tap up over here. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.